takes a while for the, there we go. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today and being part of the lesson 10 Q&A. It's our last Zoom meeting together before your final design and your network survey. And yeah, we're going to have a good chat today, I'm sure. We're going to look at the assignments coming up that you're currently working on. And then I'd like to take some time today just to check in with people on the call, just generally to see what, you know, some of your plans are after the course, whether you plan to try and pursue permaculture design as a profession, or what your plans are, whether you're going to apply it to your property. So yes, everybody is on a different journey, and it's fascinating to hear what that is. So okay, now I just had somebody join here that I want to check in with. Hi, there's a new person here, Anai, is that correct? Are you there? Oh, you're under an alias today. It's all good. That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen and we'll just briefly go over our upcoming assignment, and then we'll have a little discussion after that, see what some people's thoughts are with going forward after the class. So let us share their screen. Here we go. And I noticed we had some questions on our Google Doc, some good ones. So we're also going to take a look at those. So the local network survey, I think that's pretty obvious, and I don't think we need to dive too deeply into that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, unless anybody on the call here has questions about that. But we're just really looking at exactly what it says, your local network within your area, and listing those. So it's not a big part of the assignment, as you'll see here. With the SWOT analysis, you're getting 4 points out of 22. So, you know, we'd want to allocate our time appropriately for that. But it is really helpful to know who's in your area, who you could call on, who you can learn from in the future, you know, some of those resources, because this is really the beginning of your journey in a lot of ways. This is what I have found all my life with landscape work in general, is you go through training, or you go through, you know, moments of realization, and it just opens up doors to other parts. So it's a huge rabbit hole. You could spend your whole life studying this subject and not see it all, which is pretty amazing. So I got a little bit off topic here, but so that all plays back into the local network survey. It's really, really helpful to connect with others that are in your area, that are of similar mindset, that want to improve the world, want to improve their local ecology and some autonomy with their food and water. So that is what that's about. Anybody have any questions about the local network survey? I don't think so. I think it's pretty straightforward, but if you do, don't hesitate to jump in. Let's take a look at the concept plan. So this is the main event. This is what we've all been working towards over the last, last nine lessons. And this is the kind of culmination of all your knowledge, all that you've picked up through the course and with your site analysis. So there's a number of things we want to take a look at here, and this is key right here, the terminology of concept plan. And that's one thing I want to touch on today, is that it is an overall plan that shows how different elements in your design interconnect. Amongst other things, but the main thing here is this is not a detailed for construction plan. Okay, that is another phase, and we're not going there in this class. But if you were to go to the next step, let's say this is for a client and you've created this concept, and then there's an agreement on the concept, and the person wants to go forward with some of the work. There's a couple of ways you could go about it, but the easiest and the clearest next step is to do for construction drawings or detailed drawings, where we look at specific planting plans and any details about the contents of your drawing. So that might be the rainwater harvesting portion of it. It could be, again, planting plan. It might be a patio surface or retaining walls. So there's a lot of different things that, that we can include with those details that we're not going to worry about with this concept plan. Now, if you found that you really wanted to dive into some details with your drawing, then please, feel free to do so. But it's not something you have to do. In fact, when we put together drawings for our clients, well, I'll show it to you later what my typical process, but we get to that concept plan and make sure that we're all in agreement with the overall vision before we look at details. Because if you go too far forward and you've got a lot of details in place, they may be irrelevant based on your client's feedback. So if we take a look at what components we want to include here. So you want to show an existing plan, which is really pre-designed. So that's your base plan, right? That's pretty simple. The concept plan, I think that's fairly straightforward. We're going to look at a couple of examples, and we have a mission statement, so what we're trying to, our overall big picture, and some of those goals that we want to do or want to achieve. And that may be, increase soil health, increase water holding capacity. We want to hold more water. I mean, it could be all sorts of things. You want to increase your food sovereignty in terms of what you're able to grow yourself. And then we have proposed zones and pathway map. And that's very interesting because we can look at your previous zone map and then look at how this concept plan has changed that. And often it does change it a little bit. And sometimes it could be significant. Okay, and then we're going to go to water management, which is a really important part of the overall. And with ourselves, that's the first layer that we work on when we're doing a design for urban and, for urban and smaller acreages. We're going to look at soil fertility map and strategy. That's a vital part because you can have the best design in the world. And if you place the plants you want into an area that you haven't put much thought into in terms of fertility, you're going to have possibly some disappointing results. So the soil is what's going to drive the growth, your plant growth, which is obvious, but it's also the soil health, which drives the nutrient cycling. So that is definitely something that we want to include. And you're going to have a phase plan and budget. And often after a concept is complete, it's quite obvious how you want to go ahead with phasing this in. In an urban setting, that might be, there may be portions of the project that need to be addressed first, not just in terms of priority, but in terms of access. So access is quite a huge deal when it comes to implementation. And then the budget has to be realistic, of course. And we're going to talk about 5 principles, and then the whole social permaculture idea, and then your SWOT analysis. So I think what we're asking for here is pretty straightforward. Let us just take a look at a couple of examples. So this is one of the past students we had, lives on Vancouver Island here, up in Courtenay. And the first page, so you're going to notice, and this is something that we're going to be working towards shifting, is some of the examples are not really complete based on the rubric, right? So I don't see there's a proposed plan. We don't have a look at the existing. So you'd want to place your base map in there prior to your concept plan. But just in terms of a concept, this is a really good example. So it's showing us, some evergreen screening, a little nursery area, some solar dehydration. I won't go through all of these things, but you can see they're fairly general, right? We have a pond, some irrigation out of some rain barrels. Here there's a kiwi fence screening, so that's nice that there's been some, specifics placed in that. A little swale and evergreen vista inoculated with, mushrooms and some coppiced alders. So you can see the plan itself is fairly general, and that is in essence what a concept is. We're just looking at that big picture. What are we trying to do here, and where are we trying to do it? You can see here, there's a list of the goals and the proposed zones. And we'd have to go back to this person's earlier work to see if this has changed remarkably. But it's very interesting to see that right here, this is what we, ideally want to see, where we have the main dwelling and then that zone 1 is tucked in and around it. And it can extend out from it for sure, but we wouldn't want to see zone 1, say this whole area. I think that's, that's going to be a stretch for the homeowner. And you may find that whatever you create in your design here, if you were going to implement it in your own home, that this, be open to some change. This could change quite a bit as you start to assemble it. And I know for myself, having done this, a fair bit over the last 2 decades and more, is one of the things that would freak me out most is a client loving a concept and wanting no change. So I like to be given an opportunity to make small changes as we go through. And even when we get into the construction end of it, it's great to have some flexibility. And that's a whole topic on its own, the construction, or it'd be a whole class on its own. But again, this is a nice depiction with some pictures showing the zone 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So that is wonderful. There's a little bit here on water management. and they've indicated that they want you to look at the next page, but there's some basics here. So 10,000 gallons of collection, they're currently installed. That's very nice to have. And then all these other items. So they want to slow water down, use gray water, micro irrigation, some berms, some ponds. So this is, this is a nice strategy here. And the one thing that I'm sure you've all seen during the class is that we're not looking for silver bullets. We're looking for a diverse approach that's going to have a lot of resilience here. So in other words, if one of these items had some challenge, you still got all this backup, right? So, and this has happened to me. We have 12,000 gallons of rainwater storage, and one spring, all of our rainwater is pumped. We have, well, I won't get into too much, but we collect off the roof into a small cistern, and it gets pumped to our main storage that's up higher in our landscape. And one spring we went to go activate our system, and all our water was gone, which was rather shocking. So what happened is we ended up having a leak in one of our main irrigation lines. And so if I back up a little bit, we had the water, I activated the system. A day or two later, I go up to check on it, and everything's gone because we had a pressurized main line that had a leak in it. And I never found it. I have no idea where it is. And it's, it was all 2-inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe, very expensive, done, it was 15-year-old installation at that time. And so I had to put in a new main line and just abandon that one. But that, again, that was a big setback. We lost all our rainwater that year. But there were other elements built in so that, the system has still got some resilience. And here's that person's water plan. So again, this is quite general. They're not specifically showing us what are the details on their irrigation for the rain barrels. We're not seeing that, and that we don't have to look at that at this stage in the concept. If you were doing a detailed drawing, you would want to do that for your own sake, so you would know how to price the project. You got to know what's in it to price it, depending on how the person goes about that. But again, this is quite general, but this is what we're after. And you can see there's a lot of different strategies here. So this looks, they already collect rainwater and they're adding more to the mix. And then there's some notes here, some soil fertility plan. So they're going to start composting, and then they've listed all these other strategies. And then a phasing. And they go through the various years. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And this is a really interesting exercise to go through, especially if you're designing your own property, is just getting a handle on how can you execute this? Because especially if you're looking like Marion on a larger scale, you'd want to do it all today. And that's just not possible. So having it laid out in at least a rough manner like this on how to phase it is really, really helpful. And it's good exercise to go through, because if you end up doing this as a professional, there's going to be expectations from your client as to, okay, you've done this drawing, now what? Where do we go now? So you can definitely give them an idea of how they could phase this in, whether it's themselves or whether they're wanting you to help them, if you offer that. And then we go into the permaculture principles. Yeah, and that is about it. And they've included the social end here. So there's some good examples that you can reference. And again, be mindful that they may not contain everything that the rubric is asking, and we definitely want to take a look at the rubric just to be sure that you're covering everything that's being asked for. So it does say we want your existing plan map. So put that in there. And this is what I use to grade. So if you do not include that, and your concept is awesome as it wants, you'll lose half a mark there. So not that anybody's concerned with getting full marks. I'm sure everybody wants to just come away with the best possible concept plan based on all they've learned. And there are a few resources in here, I believe. A little bit about vision statements and mission statements and goals. And then that timeline. So there's a little bit of help here if you need it. So that's sort of a basic overview of the exercise or the lesson. And there are some questions here. So let's take a peek at some of that. Okay, so Gregory had a question. I don't think Gregory's here today. Can you clarify zone 1? Is it a place you go every day? Even if you're not maintaining it? Yes, and I remember Gregory's zone 1. It was quite large. I was a little bit concerned with that. So to answer your question, zone 1 is a place you go every day, but I would, if, for instance, I go down my driveway every morning with my wife, and we will open the gate and get the newspaper for my my folks, and so that's part of our zone 1, but it's not the entire driveway. It's pretty narrow pathway. And you would know it if you walked my driveway, because there are items at the side that don't look like they've, they're more kind of zone 3. They don't get the same amount of attention. So yes, it is where you go, but it could be quite specific. The mailbox would certainly be one of those for sure. And your chicken coop, absolutely. So yeah, Gregory, I think wood pile would not necessarily be zone 1. Wood shed, we have a wood shed, but that's maybe half of our year. It is somewhat seasonal, but I guess you could say that about a greenhouse too. You're not necessarily in there all year round. So it's a little bit ambiguous, but you do want to factor that in. So if for half of the year you're going to have to collect wood out of a woodshed, you wouldn't want it in a zone 4, far point station, right? You want it to be close, either right at the edge of zone 1 or within zone 1. Saying that, you will want to keep it a certain distance from your house, just from a safety perspective from fire. And the same goes with your chickens. We have our coop and run, and where we let our chickens roam, right at the edge of zone 1. So it's far enough from our house where we don't, we wouldn't get any negative consequence from them. It's not like they're outside our bedroom window, where we're gonna, get any odor, which we don't get odor from our chickens, but potentially it could if you weren't managing the coop with a lot of carbon. We kind of do a deep, what's the name of it? Deep litter, where we keep adding litter through the winter, and it's getting to that time where we're just about ready to pull some out when we get into March. So I hope that answers your question, Gregory. Mary had a question. So Mary, you're on the call here today.
And I think you may have answered my questions already. Oh, because you did say it was just more general, yes, and not so detailed. So I think I don't know if anybody else needs more elaboration on that, but I think you already answered my questions.
Okay, that is excellent. And you could be as detailed as you want, but being fairly general is, you know, let's say you had, like you have here, an herb garden. You could include in that label some of the herbs, or you can leave it just as herb garden. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It's always interesting to hear, but you don't have to place every individual plant, which is kind of what we did in that last lesson where we were looking at, no, sorry, 2 lessons ago in lesson 8, where we were looking at a little plant system design, and that is where we want to get specific. But here, you know, we're looking at a bigger space and we're not really asking for that because, you know, reality is that could take many, many hours. Right.
Right.
And
right.
and when I was starting out in the landscape industry, even in my first, you know, from year 10 to 15, I wouldn't have felt really comfortable doing a detailed drawing. I would do a conceptual drawing, even for large acreage, do a conceptual drawing, and then we would work all those details out on site when we were during construction, which for work at home is great, but when you have a client that needs to have some expectations of cost, it's not really good. So
Yeah.
it's much better to work the details out for clients, but that is one approach that we have taken. So that's great, Mary. I'm glad that that's clear for you. And Gregory had another question here. So he's talking about rain gardens infiltrating back into the ground, and he's not really sure of the concept relating to his specific location. And if I'm not mistaken, Gregory is in the high desert. So he is going to have you know, obvious questions relating to that, because it won't appear to him, you know, rainfall and plant growth aren't going to necessarily match up that immediate benefit of runoff and infiltration. And certainly where I live, most of the water hitting a rain garden is not going to be utilized in that moment. But what it's all about is recharging the groundwater, and it's also storing water within the soil. And that is going to be beneficial later in the season when we'd start getting plant growth. So water holding capacity in your soils is the low-hanging fruit in the rainwater harvesting world. So even if you don't put any rain gardens in or any rainwater catchment, if you boost the organic matter content of your soils, you're going to achieve a lot. So what I did, I have a little, I'm going to stop sharing that and just switch to another page here. I've got a little rain garden pamphlet that I believe is Western Washington's. Yeah. So there are a lot of guides out there for rain gardens. And honestly, because the ones, if they are produced by a government body, my experience is they can be a little bit over-engineered. But what you want to try and do is exactly what's shown here, in that you have an inlet, and that could be from your rooftop, that could be from the overflow of a cistern. There's all sorts of potential where that's coming from. But what I like to do, we put in what's called a backwater valve right here. So it's like a little flapping valve. So water can only travel one direction. Plus, you won't get any rodents going up your pipe, which in the winter, you know, that would just pose a lot of well, potential little water disasters on your property if you didn't have water flow through here and you get a backup. So that's one little trick. But you can see on the other side is the overflow, and that's key. And that is normally lower than the invert. So the invert is the bottom of the pipe, and the overflow is going to be lower than the invert. And you can see that here. If it was, it could be the same height if you needed to, just like in a rainwater harvesting cistern, you have your inlet and an outlet, and those could be at the same elevation, but you certainly don't want this to be higher for obvious reasons. You wouldn't have an effective overflow, and it can be lower. But this is a great resource, and one of the wonderful things here, I had a page. Okay, so where not to locate it, this is really important. So within 10 feet of your building, I would even suggest a little further is good. No utilities, you know, you don't want to even send the water to a rain garden that's further than 10 feet, let's say, but that slopes towards your a building. Don't want to do that. You want to be careful around retaining walls too, and I don't think that is on this list here, or steep slopes. And of course, septic tanks and septic fields, you do not want to be infiltrating more water there. So we're not going to really go too far into, there's this determination of size. That's really important. That'll really determine whether it's going to work. And this does get into a little bit of the construction. So it's a handy, just trying to find one of the pages that I came across. No, I'll have to just flip through them. So that's an important part, the drainage. So if you did your jar test and you have over 30% clay and you decide, oh, I'm going to put a rain garden in here, well, you just created a pond, right? It's not going to drain the same, it's not going to work as you've expected it. Okay, sorry, there was determine sizing. Sorry, I'm flipping through this so quickly, but I am looking for one of the sheets here, which I'm surprised I can't find now. Oh, well. I was talking about benefits. And I thought that would be handy for Gregory's question here. That is very, very odd. It's amazing we see some things that when multiple benefits. But there we go. Yeah, so here's the benefits, and this again is for Gregory's relating to his question, but you can just see all the impervious surfaces, and that's creating some runoff, and that runoff could include, you know, as soon as we're looking at stormwater and even rainwater from a house with a newly installed roof that's asphalt shingle, we're going to have compounds coming off of the roof and off of this driveway, and these rain gardens really do help to remediate that. Because once the contaminant's in water, there's actually no way for that water to purify itself. It needs compost or soil or microbial soil life to help lock up some of these hydrocarbons. So increasing the amount of water, reducing flooding, you know, and filtering these hydrocarbons and habitat. So, and enhancing your landscape. So I hope that has helped with Gregory's question here. And it's the same where I live. We get the majority of our rainfall during the winter, so that it's storage within the soil that I'm after. And a swale is the same premise, right? A swale is really just a miniaturized rain garden and often elongated, but it's just an infiltration structure, and often it's plants that are downhill from the swale that are going to benefit. And it's quite amazing how much benefit there is, even with a winter rain cycle. And Gregory, live in volcanic sandy soil. Yeah. Yeah, well, where I live, our perk test for our soil was, I think, 6 minutes. So we are constantly adding organic matter. That's our only way of increasing water holding capacity. And have rain. Yeah, no, Gregory, I would say take a look at some more information on rain gardens and see if you can check some of those boxes. But soil type is a biggie, and it looks like your site would be appropriate for it. Okay, Marian, you have some questions here. Do you want to unmute yourself and we can just chat here? You proposed plan slide. You have to draw or change. No.
Right, because it would be so hard for me to draw in. I mean, I would need to make 2 slides, I think, for that, or 3, or.
Right. Well, can you just place your base plan in there?
Yeah, and then so do we need to draw in everything we wanna?
Well, that would not be this, the first slide would just, oh, sorry, have to back up a little bit here, sorry. Your proposed plan, which would be, we'll look at the example at the same time here. Oops, I didn't need to do that. Sorry about that. Here's another, that's not as good. Yeah. So there's our proposed plan. There you go. So with your question, you'd want to have your whole base map showing, and as well as you can, the elements that you're including, and label those. Are you thinking about breaking it into pieces for better resolution?
Because it's so small, if I don't break it into pieces, and it would be hard to draw in every little, I don't know, water barrel or.
Well, I would say that if you want, what I might suggest is show your base plan as a whole, and then maybe draw some little boxes or polygons showing that area is going to get detailed in the next slide, or that sort of thing. Does that make sense? Then you get a little more resolution, but it requires more drawing. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Well, farm plans are pretty large undertakings. Yeah, they are. But remember, this is a concept, so you don't have to go too far in terms of details.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that I would say with this example that would help is actually having contours showing and having them, you know, very lightly showing, so that we at least can relate some of the plans to the actual topography. That's a great thing to be able to do. let's see what your other question is here, Marion. So budget phasing, what means WSSF? That's a good question. That actually stumped me when we first were working with these templates, and it's winter, spring, summer, fall. So it's the different seasons. It's not clear, we'll say that. It's obvious once you know. And what to draw into the MAP's soil fertility concept plan. If you have strategies that you want to employ, let's say you wanted to increase the water holding capacity in some pastured area, you could just do an outline and then a little label to that. That's what I would do. That way it's because it's pretty hard to draw, you just have to indicate the area. Slides, design goals, proposed zones, pathways, fence and gates. What to do here? Well, the goals, I'm sure I could probably list a few goals that I've picked up with your drawing. An example might be you want to better manage the water on your property. Would that be a goal, do you think?
Yes, yeah. I don't even remember why I asked what I wanted to ask. That question.
Yeah, so the design goals is, again, very broad. I want to increase water holding capacity, soil fertility in certain areas. Maybe you want to expand on the riparian or reduce invasives. I know that you in your drawing, you're talking about creation of a wetland, creation of some water storage. Maybe you want to even elaborate on that. Would that be for irrigating? Would that be for fire suppression? That kind of thing would be the design goal. And really that sort of backs up to, the client survey and what the client wants. So hopefully, let's say you were doing this for a client, you have that in the back of your mind as you're going forward. What is it they're wanting to achieve? And have I met that? The proposed zones, your zones on a bigger property, they may not really change much. On an urban property, they may change a little more dramatically because often our existing zones, I've seen zone ones that are basically the initial zones showing zone one is just really from the front door to the street, and there's not a whole lot more. But after the student has worked a concept design, there's these additional spaces within their property that they can envision that they're going to be there every day. Maybe it's a new vegetable garden, or maybe it's a patio area that they want to be in for half of the year, that sort of thing. And the pathways, yeah. How do you see those pathways changing at all? They could, right? And again, that goes back to more urban, I think, than it does acreage. Your pathways may not change at all, or very little, or, they may tweak a little bit. And same with fencing. We really haven't got into fencing. And I would say in an urban property, you're probably not designing in new fencing. On acreage, that may be something that you want to look at, and that is a whole course on its own. is how to design fencings for farms, so, or acreages, and the same with the gates. So does that make sense, Marion? Have I answered your question there?
Yes, great.
Okay, okay. Now, is there any other questions anybody have about this concept plan and the final?
Hey, Jamie, I was wondering what exactly goes in the appendix area of the assignment?
You know, that is a very good question. And I bet you if we look at our examples, there's probably little or nothing there.
I just see like extra slides or information of slides people were like saving to use as a backup, but I don't really see it as like a typical appendix of what you'd see in like a book or something like that. So I'm kind of, but it wouldn't be included unless they were wanting something there, but it's not part of the assignment. So I'm just kind of unsure.
It may be, something to benefit you after the fact. Let's go take a look at the master here and see. Right. So I think it's really for your benefit after. So let's say you want to keep everything in one place. And I know for yourself, this is your new property and you're going to be, moving forward. You'll probably, change your design a little bit. And I think that's a really good thing. I don't think that's bad at all. But if you come across information that you see is really valuable, this might be a good place just to drag and drop it and save it into that file so you've got it.
Okay.
That's a good question, but it's really for your benefit down the road rather than for the immediate, for today. I mean, if you were designing in rainwater harvesting collection and you had a really good idea of the cistern and all the filtration and your pumps and all, you could be dropping them in there.
Okay.
And
great.
you may not be there. Yeah. So that.
Okay. Thank you.
That's how I see that. Is there any other questions regarding this final lesson? Because what I'd like to do, if we have a couple of minutes, just to see if anybody on the call, what your plans are, if you want to share them, going forward after the class here. So if anybody feels like sharing that would be great. And if not, I totally get it. It's volunteer, whether you're really dialed in and focused on implementing your plan on your property over the coming years, whether you really want to learn more and more about doing this professionally. And one of the reasons I ask that is one of the other instructors, Javin Bernakovich, and myself are looking at the concept of putting on some sort of module type mentorship for people that want to go from this point or the end of the class to try and navigate themselves into offering this as a full-time or a part-time or full-time service, and how they might be able to do that without having to go through all the pain and suffering that other people have, the learning the hard way, the university of life, versus getting a few helpful tips or some level of guidance. So we're kind of exploring that whole idea, and you may receive an email or a note about that in the next week or so. We're going to have a free Zoom meeting for anybody interested in that, just to check in. And part of what we're hoping to do is actually go through a process where we help you determine whether you're really well suited for it. Because some people are very creative, and whether that be with design work or painting or pottery or whatever, but doing that full time or part time for pay for others, it may not be in alignment. So it's good to explore that before considering it. And it may be something you have to consider over time as you are exploring it as well. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be an obvious yes or no. But yeah, I'm just sort of throwing it out there, and we're hoping. Now, when I say we, I mean OSU in general, are hoping that people coming through this course are getting inspired and getting enough tools to consider that, right? And even just implementing this on your own property, that's huge. You're going to a huge benefit to your landscape and how you're going to manage it. And again, this is, for me, going through a PDC, it was just the real beginning of learning all about this. And it's the trial and error. And, way back in my career, I went through an apprenticeship for landscape horticulture, and I loved it. I just love learning as you're doing, right? Because sometimes it doesn't work out, and it's good. It's actually good when things don't, if it's a small scale, because you learn a lot from that. So does anybody want to share any thoughts or comments about that? Or
Well, the one thing I can say is that I feel like as the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. So
yeah.
So I feel pretty confident implementing some of these things on my own site, but I don't know how confident I would feel planning for someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it takes a long time to go down that road, Mary. It's like I've been working in this industry, and I'll just put the umbrella of the landscape industry for, over 35 years, and I'm still in this learning curve. Now my learning curve is farm design and learning QGIS, which is a new software for me. And I love learning and being able to apply it to work and to be able to help others create well, I guess with farms, it's creating a livelihood. But for homeowners, it's just creating a space that not only they're going to enjoy thoroughly, but it's managed in such a way that it's just as beneficial as possible on all levels versus the traditional landscape approach, which is really imposing your will. So if you see a lot of, and I can appreciate a lot of different landscape design themes or applications, but when I say imposing your will, look at, say, a modern landscape design, and that really points in that direction, where you're getting straight lines and mono plantings. There's less and less variety, and they have their place, and I'm not saying I don't like that, but we do know from the class that that's not the best approach for the ecological well-being of the area. So there's a balance, and trying to release some of the control that we all want on our land is a good start. So I've noticed on our property, since we've been here for 25 years, that areas that have been neglected, when we go back to try and revitalize them, I mean, the soils are beautiful, and that's because we did nothing. So we would have growth, and then that growth would, on deciduous or herbaceous items, we'd have growth, and then we'd have decay, and then we just have all of the soil life being built and undisturbed. And, it's a real eye opener to see that. My wife and myself saw that yesterday with an area that's just outside our zone 1. We're trying to renovate, and it's absolutely just full of worms and soil life. And it's, you feel really bad disturbing it. That's an interesting observation. So it does much better without our intervention. So somehow we have to combine intervention with benefit there too. Yeah. So Mary, to answer your question with your confidence and stuff, it takes a long time to get comfortable. So when I was an apprentice and I worked in a Vancouver Park setting, it took me 10 years to feel comfortable to be being dropped into a park area and managing it, because they're quite large, and you had to, so it took me 10 years full time, right? And then when we shifted, I quit that and went into design, I would say there's another 10 years. And then I had to learn all about estimating and project management, and that's been years and years. So it never ends, which is wonderful, I think. But for some people, it might not feel wonderful. But the learning curve, that's that real interesting opportunity, I think. And not to be, I don't get frightened by it. So it's just like, you do your first, when we first started designing, and our company was quite small, and we ended up getting a project that was like 100-acre organic farm, and they wanted to design, it's probably 3 or 4 acres of that. No, that was just seemed massive and monstrous to me at the time. But, it won all kinds of national awards and provincial awards, and, client loved it, and, a lot of stress, but it worked, and I did not have the resources that all of you would have right now, where, the internet wasn't even, had not started. So everything had to come from in-person education or books, whereas now you can jump online and really start to get a feel for things. So it's quite an interesting time in our history, where you can pick up knowledge pretty quick. Yeah. Okay. So is there anybody have anything else to say in our final moments here? Or?
Yeah, I wanted to share how inspiring this course was. And it wasn't just for me, it really inspired my daughter as well. And she's turning 18 tomorrow, and she really, really wanted to learn more and more. And she's volunteering at an animal sanctuary, and she wants to design the whole sanctuary differently. And she is going to college in September, and she actually is now studying environmental science.
Oh, wow.
And she's like a sponge. She wanted to know all about the water flow, and I think it's more her that, going forward can do the big difference. But this inspiration came from seeing me doing something in that way. And so this is so rewarding and exciting for me to see her going out and having that benefit.
Yeah.
I think it's great when our children watch us doing something, and they then just see if it's sincere, they will do that too.
Sure.
And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Well, and also for all the inspiration for the property.
Yes, yeah. So you have a large property, and you could, I'm sure you'll be spending many, many hours in the future working on it. And it's great to have a little bit of a framework as a guidance, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, Marion. It's, yes, it is. It's a really inspirational field, I find. And
yes,
it has so many, we rely so much on our soil. So hence we rely on, I'm sure all of you have seen those little snippets on social media where human existence is reliant on that top 6 inches of soil. Without it, we wouldn't be growing food. We wouldn't have forests. We wouldn't, so it's quite, the planet's amazing. And when you can find a design process that is in alignment with it, and resonates, and you can see it doing some positive good, I mean, that's just a great combo. So appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. I've been doing this course for 5 years, I guess, 3 or 4 times a year, and along with other courses they offer, and it's fantastic. And I'm really happy they've developed the pro version, in that it's a longer session and that we get these Q&A Zoom meetings, because otherwise, the feedback was strictly in the discussion board before, so there was less opportunity for people to get more information. And I think these have been really helpful. But yeah, so great to hear. Well, is any other comments that anybody had before we chime off here? Or...
Can I ask one? I'm just curious about, because I agree with everything Marion said. I found this very educational and inspiring, and you've been a great, I wonder if you have some kind of teaching background, because you've been very good at how you do feedback and everything.
Well, thanks.
Is it typical that the attendance drops off like it has? Like, I've noticed that as we go on, fewer and fewer people are.
That's very common. I see that every class. So often I might start with 20 students and end up with 15 or 12, and I think what happens, and that was part of our motivation to go with a longer time duration, give people more opportunity to work on the course. But as you all know, there are a lot of demands time-wise on you to go through not just the content, but then you have to go through all the assignments. So it's a big commitment. And honestly, it's it's the highest quality online PDC that I'm aware of to date. And when I took my PDC, it was online, but I got no feedback, nothing. And there were no assignments. There was a final design at the end, which, I think I did a great job, but then I have a lot of tools and background. And for somebody this was all very new, they would not be getting the same out of the course. And to answer your question, Mary, no, I'm not a trained teacher, but I've always, it seems to have been quite a big part of my life in the past couple of decades. As soon as we moved here, we started doing workshops, and I've learned a lot from other instructors here. And I was just about to take a permaculture teacher training session on Vancouver Island here. And the day that it was starting was the day COVID started. And Jude Hobbs, who's the teacher, she's in Oregon. So anyone in Oregon, keep their eyes peeled for that name, Jude Hobbs, amazing teacher. She also does a really good course on hedgerows, particularly for agricultural settings. But we're just about, the class was starting that day, and she had to head back to the U.S., back to Oregon, before they shut down the border.
Yeah.
So
wow.
I was a little disappointed with that, but it'll happen one day. But yeah, thank you very much for your feedback. I appreciate that. And I have lots of fun. So that's why I keep doing it. And yeah. Well, thank you, Amy, for your feedback. And no, it's been a great course. And do keep your eyes open for that email. If anybody is interested in pursuing this beyond this course, wanting to see if they're maybe a good fit for designing for others, then there'll be that Zoom meeting coming up sometime in mid-March, I believe. We haven't really hammered out all the details right now. We're just kind of exploring whether there's interest in it. So yeah, well, it's been a lot of fun, everybody. And thank you very much for all your hard work. All your design work has all been very unique and been amazing. And the effort that you've all put into this is huge. And if you're going to go and do this all over again for somebody else or in a new property that you arrive at, you'd probably be amazed how quickly it would come versus starting from scratch like you have with this course. So thanks again for all your fantastic feedback, and really enjoyed the course myself and this class. And I really look forward to seeing your concept plans and providing you some feedback there, and best of luck with your future endeavors.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.